You are listening to Product and Growth Show.
I haven't done it in a while. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Product and Growth Show. It's episode 97. My name is Pavlo Pedenko, and I'm the host of the show. And today we're joined by Geoff Stead, a seasoned Edtech. A seasoned tech CPO. And Geoff led product at both Babbel and MyTutor. I'm actually so excited to talk to you about both of these companies. And for those of you who doesn't know, Babbel is a language learning app that until recently was ahead of Duolingo in terms of revenue, which is crazy given the scale of Duolingo. And MyTutor is one of the largest tutoring platforms in the UK, which is, again, a massive market. Geoff also wrote a book titled In Giants of Engagement, and this book explores how to use generative AI in tech and in business as a whole. Welcome, Geoff. Say hi to our listeners.
Hey, thanks for dialing in and listening to us and joining in our conversation. I hope it brings you some joy and some value. As you said, I'm originally from South Africa. I've lived mostly in the UK, sometime in Berlin, sometimes in California, always doing product leadership roles from a software starting point, but always that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Super excited to have you here. All right, Geoff, let's get straight into that. Why Edtech? It's notoriously hard to build a good Edtech product, and lots of the products that have become big in Edtech, they're big on the distribution side, but not necessarily on the value side. So let's unpack this one.
I guess I'm motivated by doing things that make a difference. And education is just a fantastic place for that. I mean, the world's falling apart. There's ridiculous things happening everywhere. In a lot of instances, it wouldn't be nearly as bad if people were better educated, or if kids left school better equipped for the future, or if adults were able to retrain or to be able. So I think education's a really powerful multiplier force. And as a product person, anyway, you like the idea of multiplying forces, right? You try and design something that can be used by hundreds or thousands or millions, and you have this sort of multiplier. And I just really like the idea that the things I'm working on have some ability to possibly be a multiplier like that and have a sort of radiating impact.
But would you agree that it's notoriously hard to build a scalable edtech business?
Yes, it's notoriously hard to build a scalable edtech business.
Why?
And I think I probably I'm naive enough to still be in that space because I started my journey not in the startup world, but in larger organizations doing kind of innovation work. So I was running innovation labs and partnering with crazy professors to build apps to encompass the way they did teaching or learning. And so I didn't actually need to make money from selling the product. We got the funding flew via some other channel. And so it was a sort of B2B, or it was an R&D funding. And so that gave me 15, 20 years of building edtech products, but without worrying about, am I selling enough to stay alive, which let me focus on the purity of the impact or the learning value above the revenue value. And it was only later in my career that I then pivoted into the full-on brutal reality of kind of edtech startups and trying to sell direct to consumer and how that worked. So I guess I had I dealt with the early building blocks already.
Yeah, and you had probably a very idealistic perception of this business from the get-go.
Probably, but it is hard. It is really hard, right? But and sometimes the things that make it scale are the things that lose value in what the actual validity of the learning is. You know, the best learning experience you can probably have is one-to-one with a human teacher sitting by your side, or a mentor or a coach stepping you through some complicated thing. That's probably the best. So any version of scaling that starts falling apart because you can't pay enough money to have enough people to be spending enough time with enough quality assurance across all of that. So you kind of have to take a step or two back when you're thinking of scale and impact, and try to understand what's the sweet spot you can target where you really are doing something valuable and good and impactful, but you're not trying to do everything and get tangled up in the things that just don't scale.
Yeah, fair enough. I remember when I was at Preply, we always looked at Babbel, and I want to unpack your Babbel experience. And we always look at them at the companies that has really nailed distribution. And I'd say that their marketing promises were so, yeah, I just felt like they were over-promising along the way. Obviously, it's not a claim. It's just my perception as more from the consumer side. So what I'm trying to say is that whenever you do an Edtech distribution, how would you balance between what you promise in marketing to actually convert them and the expected learning outcomes that this product could actually drive?
It's a really good question. And I think maybe I'll answer it twice if you don't mind. I'll tell you a little bit about the Babbel story, and then I'll answer more broadly. I guess Babbel, when I joined, was probably typical of lots of other companies that have scaled fast with strong marketing promises, and actually the product itself has struggled to keep up with the scaling, all the promises. And that would probably have been true at the time I joined Babbel. So the promises were probably things that were hard to actually achieve in the product, and probably given a choice, Babbel would have spent more money on marketing than the product improvement or product changes, just because the marketing led to more direct revenue, and the product improvement, we didn't have such a tight connection between that and revenue. We didn't prove that. So it definitely was skewing strongly towards the marketing side. I was part of quite a considerate effort and move to try and move it to be a bit more balanced between marketing and product. I think it would be, people talk about being product led, and that would be lovely if I could say, yeah, it's fully product led. The reality is it's a tension between product and marketing led, and that tension is actually quite a source of creativity if you get it balanced right. You just need to have a really strong relationships and a shared understanding of what matters, and to sort of adjust that balance. So I think the tension is legitimate. I think it's a critical part of it. So in the Babbel story, what we did is we brought some financial proof points that helped the marketing engine understand that it's not worth selling something that you can't deliver. We would have sort of that you'd in effect get low quality leads. You'd get people signing up who would drop off really fast. And if you could change your marketing message a bit to be more strongly anchored to what the product could do for them, or the mindset that would help them succeed in the product, you'd get fewer leads, but the higher quality, and they'd be much more likely to convert. So it actually did pay off to be slightly more picky at how you market and how you tell the message. And so we ended up, it took us some years of shifting the dial to get there, but we ended up understanding that actually the more time learners spent with Babbel, whether it was a paid product, a free product, and anything, the better, the longer term, more revenue, longer term, more stickiness. And so we changed our language to be more about the commitment to learning and the time spent learning, and the sort of celebrating, even if you did the free thing, instead of worrying too much about getting you into the paid thing quickly. So it softened, it changed the message we used. So our message was more focused around somebody sticking with the learning, which brought better quality leads, which helped people stick with the product longer, which gave us quite a significant overall revenue and stickiness sort of improvement. But that did take a bit of we sort of had the proof points, but it took a bit of a leap of faith from the CEO to buy into it and go, all right, we're shifting the North Star. It's about learning minutes. This is the most important. We don't want low quality leads coming in, because they'll decrease our overall average learning minutes because they drop out so fast. And so even the sales team were incentivized around learning minutes. So you kind of asked slightly more broadly about how you deal with that tension. And I think you need to build a strong enough value proposition around the product that the sales team celebrate that. Quite often where you have a very strong marketing-led message that's not true of the product, it's because maybe the marketing team have given up waiting for something that's a strong enough message from the product, and they're just trying to fill the space. And so partly there is a bit of an arms race, but partly you as a product leader need to lean in quite meaningfully and forcefully to help telling new stories about the real value proposition and help landing that new story. So that's where product marketing can really help as a bridge between the sort of selling arm and the building arm, but really help build out and celebrate what is the thing that works. And then you'll find that drifting and just appearing in the marketing messages if you're strong enough. If you're too quiet and passive about it, then the marketing team just fill the space with what they know or what they think the buyers want.
So just let's make it a bit more actionable, because as we started, like before we started to record the podcast, I'm from Ukraine originally. In Ukraine, we have so many companies that actually nailed like distribution part of the business, but not necessarily nailed the product part. So, I'm pretty sure that there are many folks who are listening to this right now, and they're like, okay, like how would I do that? How would I make this first step on figuring out how to stop over promising, or how to at least start to balance what I promise in marketing, what my product actually does. So if we take it into, if we try to split it into action steps, what would they be? Like, how would you start as a product leader in a company that is now focused on distribution heavily, over promises heavily, and does not have neither good activation nor good retention?
So I guess you really need a deep expertise in the domain that you're working in, right? Whether it's, I don't know, health tech or language learning or whatever the domain is, you really need that. And sometimes I've stepped into I've looked at products with a really successful selling arm and a mediocre product, and there actually isn't that expertise in the business. It's surprisingly thin. So you're so good at selling to the message that you don't actually have somebody you would put up on a stage and be a guru in the domain that you're focusing in, language learning. And so I think you really need to build that domain expertise and not make it part of your selling, but make it part of breathing the product. So that can take you a while to get strong. So I'll use the Babbel example. We had fantastic content team, really switched on, really smart at language learning, but they weren't really integrated in the product build cycle. They were kind of at arm's length, building standalone courses. And we cherry-picked people and pulled them really into the product teams and helped build a much stronger voice for what's good quality learning, what works, what doesn't work. A lot of sort of learning science or data analysis to track your product and understand really what are the sweet spots. So you need to do the hard work to become experts in your domain and to learn about what really is working in your product and trying to craft the story that says this product really helps language learning because it lets you actually speak and it lets you actually rehearse things and it lets you practice things for real life or whatever the sections are. So you have to build that expertise in your domain first. Otherwise, you shouldn't bother. So I guess that's probably the first step. And then the second step is to really amplify the bits that work. So which bits of, if nothing works in your product, you need to do some frantic reinventing and rebuilding and figure out what works. But hopefully some bits work, right? So then amplify those, move those features to the very beginning so learners see them first. It really do the work to make sure that those features are driving meaningful engagement, and then celebrate it. Talk to the marketing team about it, talk to customers about it, go to podcasts and talk about these things. So really get that message out and see where it lands. So it's sort of like product market fit all over again, but you're starting not from what the marketing promise is, but rather from what this product is doing and telling a story about that. So I guess I would start there and just being really strong advocates for some or other features or mechanisms or things that really make it work. And then try and feed that back into the sales message.
I've just witnessed multiple attempts when my friends were joining companies that were at a similar stage and very strong on distribution, a bit weak on the product side. And they've just failed miserably. They failed miserably to build any meaningful retention. And obviously, I would not even say it's their fault or it's their company's fault. It's just companies are used to grow in a certain way and they prioritize a certain strategy to grow. So I'm just wondering, like, as someone who's been there, done that, what are your actual like survival tips? Imagine you're an UPM, You're not joining from a fancy CPO title, but you're just, I would say, like a product manager, let's say, of a middle level. You were hired to enhance a value proposition and enhance like a product itself. And you join the environment where what's celebrated is an actual immediate growth, like not in 30 days, not in 6 months, but today. How do you survive?
I guess if I'm joining a company like that, my assumption would be that the sort of shallow external messages, maybe marketing, is driving a lot of the feature requirements. AI is big. We need an AI feature. Add the AI feature. Can we have it in 2 weeks' time? And so the whole sort of build logic of the company is based around features that have a sort of we hope are product features that people will buy. So it's a sort of marketing-led feature stack that you're working to, and there's no way out. If that's the way the company is operating, you're very unlikely to be able to solve this. This new PM who's just joined, it's almost unsolvable. So actually, what you have to do is find a way of partially breaking that mentality. You do it, your CPO does it, talk to the CEO about a new mechanism for running priorities. You have to find a way that that's not what's beating the pulse of what you release when and why, but rather you gravitate towards finding a North Star or finding an impact measure or agreeing across the company what would be an impact measure that you could all strive towards. You kind of have to do that. So the tricky thing as a PM is your job is partly to keep everybody happy, but sometimes the way to keep them happy is to be an arsehole in the short term and to deliver delight in the midterm. And so that you're sort of trading off what I'm saying no to now, but that I am listening enough to you so that the thing I'm releasing in the midterm is adding value to what you do. And that's sort of the game. And it's tough if you're a junior PM stepping into a role where the way decisions are made and prioritized is locked in stone. If you're a senior PM stepping in, you ought to be able to shape that. Find a way of carving out space, get agreement to do it differently for 6 months just to prove yourself, work at a North Star and try and get alignment around the North Star and then let it flow backwards from that. Anything you can do to try and grab some of the reins of control so that you're working on the learning impact rather than the sort of feature flow.
Okay, no, fair enough. I like your answer. Coming back to your experience at Babbel, so you've mentioned that at some point you've changed your North Star metric to minutes learned. Is it correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And what were the most exciting things that you shipped that actually impacted this metric?
Nice. I'll give you a really easy one. I didn't realize how much impact it would make. Podcasts. We started. It was surprisingly complex to agree to start doing podcasts at Babbel, because at the time we were really worried about the fact that it's free and it might be eating into people who would otherwise buy. And so we ran a small trial. It was really successful. We lent into it. We scaled out different podcasts, different languages, different levels. And that was a massive booster for our learning minutes. And it drove people signing up to the product. At the end of every podcast, they were kind of lessons, but really nicely spoken lessons. And at the end of it, we would reference some lessons in the app that you could go to strengthen what you were doing. And then we also let you play the podcast from inside the app rather than inside your podcast player. And we had something like 50% of all listens were people who've moved into the app and were inside the app, which was outrageous because in the one scenario it's free, the other it's part of a paid package. But really that tie between a podcast and then some lessons worked really well. So that's an example, it's sort of the technicalities of building a podcast are not massively complicated, but actually the creativity it gave us to create quite different types of learning experience with different voices and different language combos. It gave us this really creative playing field and anchored back into the core app so we could prove that the minutes were actually generating sales. So that was probably the thing that made the biggest impact. We built games and we launched a live product where you could speak to live tutors. And so we launched a bunch of different things. Probably, if I think of overall, what's the biggest impact I had, it was helping. We had one mega app, just one app, and it was a complicated technical beast, which was very slow to change. We were kind of trapped in all sorts of constraints. And I guess the things that probably made the biggest impact to the most learners was slowly on the fly swapping out bits of that app so that we managed to re-platform it without stopping downing tools, and just as a sort of by swapping out pieces, which enabled us to release way faster all the time, different lessons, different content. We were stopped from that. And also it helped us leapfrog to go just from direct to consumer to be going to B2B. We found a way of using the same app to also support B2B and release some other things like the live product, which were also available for B2B on a kind of shopping list. So we managed to broaden our offering from a very successful direct to consumer one to a growing fast B2B one with the same core functionality at its heart, which is quite a tricky balancing act to pull off.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love this example with podcast because I remember at Preply when I joined for a short period of time, I helped to build their content marketing team. And normally we just worked with all top of the funnel assets, such as like blog, Q&A pages. Preply has their own like Quora where people ask how to pronounce X or how to do whatever, basically grammar focused Quora. So we optimize conversion there. And one of the assumptions that I had was to actually build podcasts, because I remember when I inherited this blog, it was already generating like 1 million visits a month or something. Like it was something outrageous. It was like a lot of visits across multiple languages. And I had this hypothesis that we need some sort of a tripwire that would help us to move from visits to some like more loyal visits, let's put them this way, like listeners. But my problem was that I've never managed to build confidence to sell this confidence to senior folks. Like I would always come up with these ideas that would look to them a little bit random, and they would be like, why would we spend money on that if we could do, I don't know, write another 3,000 blog pages? And I'm just curious, how did you manage to build this confidence, and how did you manage to convince people to invest into product? Because I would assume you needed someone to, you know, create a script. You needed someone who would produce a final piece. You had some engineers to build the actual part of the product that would stream the audio. How did you do confidence?
How I did it, you start small and fast and find some proof points. And as the more senior you are, the more forgiveness you have for a small pocket of wild behavior, as long as everything else is going well. So we worked with internal teams. It was an area of interest for some of the content team. We bought them kit. We helped them get set up with the right studio. We gave them a small amount of budget to bring in some people, but mostly it was done internally by retraining or upskilling some of our existing team. And we did it as an experiment. I'm quite a big believer in having a cadence of small experiments running alongside the main work, and leading those experiments led a little bit by people's individual passions. So quite common at everywhere I've worked is you have a hack day every quarter or so where there's broader set of problems to try, and quite often that's a nice testing ground for people to try out a slightly wacky idea. And if it builds enough momentum, you can then give them some weeks to tease it out a bit more, or some months to tease it out a bit more. And that would be one of those examples that I didn't have broad agreement that we should do podcasts, but we did have a fairly broad agreement that we needed to try and think of doing something differently. And so I some of it's a mixture of smoke and mirrors, how much you share with the wider business, how much you let people just run and you don't communicate it too heavily because you sort of giving them a broader remit, but the way you're thinking about it strategically is actually a narrow remit. You're saying, all right, I'm giving 5% of my people's time to exploring new bets, that's fine. Whereas if the rest of the senior leadership understand exactly what you're doing in that 5%, suddenly it gets open to questions. So I guess that's one of the benefits as you get more senior is you have some ability to carve out some credibility for space to just try. And this was one of those bets that worked quite well.
So just to rephrase it, it was a bit of a leap of faith that happened to work out.
Yeah. But you need to be doing, I mean, it's like all bets, right? You need to be having multiple small leaps of faith on the go. And then if some work out, you put a bit more momentum behind them. And then as a leader, you need to tell the story to help the rest of the organization be happy about it. You can't just sit there quietly. You do need to decide at which point you champion it, or you talk up the fact that you have some leaps of faith on the go.
Yeah, I love it. I love your answer.
I've got one back for you. You were talking about your Preply sort of content marketing side of things. We had exactly the same at MyTutor. So we had whenever new tutors started, they would, as part of their onboarding, they would answer a couple of questions, and we listed all of those as a sort of online Q&A for any help for any exam stuff. We just had this sort of massive archive of questions, and it was a monster for us of exactly the same. People searching, finding help, but we also struggled to make a meaningful. It was massive traffic, but it led to very tiny sort of signups. And that was one of a dilemma for us. It is clearly valuable. It's clearly a lot of traffic, but it's kind of not quite selling us as strongly as it could. So yeah, I empathize with the challenge.
Oh, I remember we did so many experiments to make it work for us because we were acquiring tons of traffic. But I think some smart SEO people, they call it a sample traffic, where people look for examples and like samples. And surprisingly, the most successful experiment, I think there were two really successful experiments we've done on this part of the website. The first one was giving incoming traffic a feature that would allow them to rate answers. So like you land to a landing page, there's a question, there's an answer, and they would be just able to press helpful, not helpful, whatever. And then if they press helpful in order to record their vote, we would create an account for them and would kind of start sending them an onboarding flow that was tailored to this particular type of traffic. That was, according to what I remember, and I have a very vague recollection of the time, it was relatively successful. And then another one that proved to be weirdly successful was a leaderboard of tutors who answered these questions. So we would just show, okay, those are the tutors who are whatever, like the most active in this community section of the website. And again, if my recollection is correct, it was driving quite a few paying customers. But again, we're talking about like triple digits out of triple digits a month out of 500,000 visits, so it was not a massive amount anyways.
I had a experiment that we were running, but we never quite finished it, where I was trying to move away from text-based answers, which are easier to search for and have less personality, and rather have video answers of a tutor explaining that, so that you were forced not just to get the answer, but to understand how cool it was to have a tutor explaining it to you, and so that you were more interested in the tutoring than the answer. We did roll out some, and it was quite popular, but we never got to the point that we switched them all over.
I had the same assumption, and we tested the exact same thing. But the way we tested it was quite scrappy. We basically collected our top pages by traffic, created a Google form, and sent our tutors like a note saying, "Hey, do you want to pop up on this page? It has whatever a million views a year. Record a video answer." And we received like quite a few answers of that. Then we uploaded manually, created like a nice video player sort of skin on top of this video. And even though customers were clearly interacting with these videos and they were watching them, we haven't witnessed any metrics uplift. So in a way, it was engaging and entertaining, but probably we're just not working with the traffic we were meant to work with. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. Anyway, back to you. Sorry to derail you.
No, it's funny that we kind of worked on a very similar thing. So the last time we met in real life, you gave this talk about engagement letters, and just walk our listeners through what are they and how did you use that framework at Babbel and MyTutor?
Cool. So I guess this is sitting in the direct-to-consumer learning app space. So put your head into that space. That this is the space I've been operating in for quite a while. When you build an app, people often talk about the aha moment, that kind of moment where your user suddenly understands why it's useful in their life, and that they kind of lean into it, right? If you're building products, you know about the aha moment. The tricky thing with the learning app is quite often you're trying to change a habit or adopt a new learning habit that you don't have at the moment. I've decided I want to learn Spanish. I really want to learn Spanish. I've got a holiday coming in 2 months. So I've made a commitment, but I haven't been learning a language until now. I'm starting from zero. There's 101 reasons that I won't complete my learning journey. My brain's full of ways of tricking me. Today, it's full of ways of tricking me to say, yeah, you can do it. Buy that app, sign up, do something. But in tomorrow or the next day, it's full of more ways of tricking me to not do it. You can skip a day. It doesn't really matter. You can pick it up faster. It's sunny at the moment. Let's do it this evening. your brain's great at that, right? So when you're trying to help somebody build a learning habit or sort of change their habits to adopt this new learning thing, it's sustained work. It's not quick. It's not just one aha moment. So yes, I guess that's the first thing. You need to find a way of, over a period of time, helping them evolve their habits as well as teaching them Spanish. You have to embrace both of those things at the same time. So that's, I guess, the first part of the puzzle. Second part of the puzzle is if you think about the funnel. So I haven't actually signed up yet. I'm thinking of learning Spanish. I'm searching online. I know about Google. I know about Babbel. I know about a couple of other products. There a whole lot of sort of pseudo-science has gone into those pages that I see, the marketing pages, the funnel, the choosing a price point, why I'm picking one product over another. They've had brutal A/B testing, multiple iterations, words have been tweaked, buttons have been repositioned. There's a whole lot of science there, which is about kind of moving me towards making a pay commitment. But as soon as you push that button and pay and get in the product, that all falls aside, and you're in a whole different world. You're in a different product, and it throws you into a whole series of learning. So that's a sort of whole set of kind of science. It's kind of slightly pseudoscience, the Cialdini's behavior, nudging. There's a bunch of stuff that's been woven into those ideas. Now you're in the learning product. There's a bunch of other ideas that are about what makes good learning happen, right? It's about phased reminders, getting multiple choice questions that are phased out over time. There's about kind of creating intellectual difficulties, a sort of constructive tensions or constructive friction in your learning so that you learn better. About mixing up learning. So if I'm learning something today and something tomorrow, then the third day I should be reminding myself about a bit of both of those, not only one or the other. So there's a bunch of fairly established sciences there. But if you throw that all at the person as they arrive, it's like a massive gear shift. One moment they've been lured in with all these promises. Next minute they're in a complicated interface, and you just kind of clock out. It doesn't work for you. So the idea of the engagement ladder is to think quite carefully about the different stages in your journey over the first few months of using a learning product, and try to make sure in that very first phase that there's a lot of continuity with the funnel that brought you in there, the promise, the kind of help you get set up, help you believe, so that the first day is the first step. And in that step, your whole mission is to set them up to return and set them up to make some kind of commitment or some kind of commitment to themselves. How often am I going to do this? An idea, you have to help them understand that it's not a one-off. You're not going to learn Spanish in one visit. Help them think about when they're going to do it, or how I'm dealing with reminders. Also, your first visit, it's all about trying to lock in some kind of micro commitment. Then in the next stage is your first week, and your whole aim in the first week is be simple, keep it light, keep it fun, but make sure you come back again. The entire mission of your first week is to try and get you to come back daily, or that just do everything you can, even if the learning's quite insignificant. So that's where language learning apps might lean into. Duolingo is fantastic at this. They really lean into vocab, or something that's quite easy to learn at quite a trivial level. At Babbel, we realized that if you could help people imagine themselves speaking, that helped at this stage. So we would put speaking practice activities in. But this first week is a critical point to build up a bit of a habit. So first 7 days, be gentle, be nice, make it easy. Try and find the right level, but just be as easy as you can. Once you've got past those 7 days, you're then in the next step of the ladder. And in this step of the ladder, that's where you actually do the more meaningful learning. You start mixing things up, you make it a bit more complicated, you reveal some of the more complicated features in your app. And this is kind of probably the best scenario of how you imagine your app to be. But if you haven't got people through the first 7 days, they're not going to engage in these other features. So you slightly reveal these features like an onion level, and that's the stage where if everything keeps going, that's your app. It gets a bit more complicated. You mix different modes of teaching. You introduce games or podcasts or other things. And if you can keep them learning on that, you're all good. But they won't stick with it. Every now and again, people do drop out and they come back in again. And so the fourth stage is what happens for these people who drop out and get them back. Because the idea is you sort of need about 3 months worth of days of using a product to really change your habit. there's a bit of a pseudoscience that says you need 19, 20, 21 days to form a habit. It depends on context and what the habit is and why you're doing it. But the more scientific is it takes about 66 days. That's the kind of average length of time of doing something new before you've really formed a habit. So
I think, I think this framework is clear, like more or less clear, and the sequential kind of bit of it is, makes a lot of sense. So can we try to make it more practical and maybe take one of the projects that you've led at Babbel on MyTutor and sort of walk us through how this framework has helped you to deliver what you wanted to deliver?
Yeah, easily. So I guess the what it taught us was in the first 7 days, be simpler with features. So like in Duolingo's case, streaks are a big business for them. It's about having streaks. In your first 7 days, they're very forgiving with streaks. You can miss a day, it doesn't really matter. As long as you come back after your third day, they'll repair your streaks for you. They're much, much more forgiving than they are further on, because it's about helping you build that habit. At Babbel, we made the lessons shorter and shorter and shorter, because we understood that if you complete a lesson, you're more likely to come back. If you don't complete it, you're less likely to come back, regardless of the length of lesson. So by shortening the lessons, you force more completions, which make more people come back again. So that was one of the triggers for us. And another trigger was, I mentioned earlier, activities that help you imagine yourself speaking, even if it doesn't really validate it too well, even if it's fairly simplistic. So we ran loads of data on our early lessons, understood which things were drivers for people coming back and which ones won't, redesigned the courses. So those certainly happened either in your first visit or within your first 7 days. We'd hide some complexity, so you wouldn't even see it for the first 7 days. So these are examples of that first 7 day thing.
Yeah.
Then I guess the 7 days to 21, that's where we were worried about mixing it up a bit so it doesn't get boring, it doesn't get samey. So we started introducing some courses that were not really about the language, they're about the country or the culture. Mm-hmm. So you would be learning as much about, it's Easter time, this is how Easter is celebrated in Spain, and you're learning about Spanish food, and we sort of mixing it up a little bit. Or throwing in the podcasts, or introducing some games. So we were trying to help them understand that learning is a thing that isn't just that one moment in the app, but trying to connect to other sides of stuff. You know, there's this idea about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So to the extreme, if I have a product that's great gamification and leaderboards, and I get super into the leaderboard, but I don't actually fall in love with the thing I'm learning, I'm more in love with the leaderboard, that's going to skew me towards doing easier games so that I score higher on the leaderboard, which actually doesn't benefit my learning as much, or repeating words I already do know. Whereas better learning is to make it harder and to struggle a bit more, productive struggle. And so the idea of extrinsic to intrinsic motivation is that if you're extrinsically motivated, you do it for the leaderboard. And if you're intrinsically motivated, you do it because you love the idea of yourself being able to speak Spanish for real, and you're willing to put up with more friction to get to that point. And if you really want someone to stick with learning, you need to help them move that dial. They might start with the more extrinsic. That might be one of the reasons you got going. But once the wheel's spinning, once the engagement's happening, you really want to try and move them over and get them to a point that they love themselves speaking Spanish, or they're motivated by that rather than just the leaderboard. And that's where some of this culture stuff is quite good, because it makes it a bit more real.
I love it. I think it's a great example. Cool. Have you read the most recent request for startups from Y Combinator?
Tell me what it is and I'll tell you.
They are now looking, basically, request for startups is like this document they publish before every batch, and this document sort of underlines or points out to the opportunities that they think founders need to explore. And surprisingly, this time there are two sort of categories, so like items on the list that look into Edtech. One of them is called AI tutoring. So they want someone to come and kind of build a proper AI tutor. And then they want someone who would come and they want to find a companies that would come and build kind of a future of education with AI, whatever that means. So then, obviously, you wrote this book in Giants of Engagement, and it explores GenAI and how it helped the business. But what do you think is the future of this blend of EdTech, what EdTech needs to do, and the technologies that AI or large language models, oh, sorry, my pronunciation is horrible today, kind of are able to provide?
So I'm a fan of evolution and change and technology and trying to understand how we can use it to scale education. So I'm starting off from a fairly pro perspective, just as a small print. I'm really excited by some of the things that the large language models could be bringing, mostly not for this generation of features, but for the fact that it forces us to question how we teach, how we assess, how we understand progress, what work's going to be like in 5 years' time, what types of skills are useful. It's one of these sort of fracture moments that shakes up a lot of the existing established ways of thinking about education, trainings, about exam writing. And so I think it's really exciting for that, because it forces us to really think differently at quite a fundamental level. That doesn't make it straightforward for somebody using an AI to build an app today, because today the world is still mostly, the education systems and the way progress is measured and exams are taken are mostly done independently of AI. They're in that sort of pre-AI stage. And the most exciting moment will be when those all start crumbling and new things are being built. And we're probably a couple of years away from that. So it doesn't make it super straightforward what to do today. But broadly, I'm a big fan. I think that AI tutoring is a good example for something that's really interesting, because for several years, everybody's been saying AI tutoring is the thing, it's the future. There's been if you just search for AI tutor online, AI tutor startup, AI tutor app, you'll find pages and pages and pages of attempts to build AI tutors, and very few people really stick with them. Most of them haven't been a success. Maybe very narrow verticals. And that tells you that in itself summarizes what a lot of the problem is, because it's a powerful new tech. People have wrapped it with a very trivial amount of wrapper and launched it as an experimental product without really understanding what it takes to be a good tutor. And to a small extent, being a good tutor is about answering a question and teaching you the subject matter against a curriculum. To a large extent, being a good tutor is somebody who inspires you and challenges you and notices that you're a bit sleepy today and changes the topic. And that maybe with the MyTutor in particular, we used to look for tutors who were only a few years older than the students themselves. And so they can be quite inspiring and give you inside tips on the universities they might go to. So there's a bunch of these kind of human behavioral stuff that the majority of the AI tutors that you've seen just don't do. They don't do that at all. They answer questions and they deliver content, which is not really the problem that needed solving to do good tutoring. I mean, you'll know this from Preply as well, right? So what I'm excited about with the tutoring though is slowly people are starting to understand that. There's been some quite nice studies out just in the last couple of months, where people have been taking a tutor and then giving it a whole lot of prompts so it can act like a coach, or sort of ask Socratic questioning. Maybe it doesn't give you the answer, but it sort of nudges you to find the answer yourself and then congratulates you when you find it, and that it can understand a bit more about your context. It doesn't forget you from this week to last week. It remembers you, and it can add to the conversation of last week. And small things like this that actually make it more like what works for human tutors. So I think it's a great example. I'm sure that AI tutors could be very powerful, but only if you really wrap some of these human behavioral nudging things around the outside. And it won't be as good as a human, probably never, but you ought to be able to get a lot closer than the current ones, which are really just answering questions and delivering content, which is a pretty boring lesson.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. I feel like from my time at Preply and my time building Mathema, mass tutoring marketplace, it's basically clear that it's never been about content delivery itself. It's about you as a learner sticking around for longer because you just build this personal rapport with the tutor. And I'm curious if people would be able to build something like that with an AI or whatever technology comes out, powered system.
Yeah. And I think that's the really exciting thing is, but you need to go deeper into understanding what's really working in learning.
Yeah.
I really enjoy one part of my career at the moment. The stage I'm at is I get asked to advise lots of smaller edtech startups in various modes, sometimes as part of an acquisition, and it's really disappointing how often the team behind the company are lovely, well-meaning, good intention, with very, very shallow ideas about how learning actually works. And it's like a real wasted opportunity. There's a growing area of learning science, just about which statistically, scientifically, what are ways that learning works? How does tech interact with you? It's quite established fields there. But to the large extent, people aren't engaging with that. They're passionate about helping learning go better, but they're doing content distribution or some sort of dynamic content discovery that's built other models that actually don't have how people learn at the heart of it. So I guess if I had to give advice to some of those companies jumping in a Y Combinator, go in hard with AI, friggin' awesome, but have a meaningful differentiator around how you take that power of the LLMs and wrap it around with a meaningful learning interaction, because that's going to be your moat. Your moat isn't using the LLM. Anybody in any company and anywhere in the world can use the same LLM. Your moat has to be some deeper understanding of how learning works and reaching your particular demographic of users.
Oh, I love that. I love the take. All right, that's going to be the last one, a career advice. So you've now done 2 big gigs, right? You were a CPO at Babbel, you were a CPO at MyTutor. Both are great companies. I admire greatly. And I know that you've now landed a new CPO gig, and I want to ask you about your process, and I won't ask you about what company is that. But what are your advice of landing a new product role when you reach a certain seniority in your career? Because obviously quite often we talk to senior product managers, group product manager, directors, and I feel like market dynamics for this role is slightly different than what it is for CPO. So I'm just curious how you approach that. Like, what was your process? How did you look for companies? What was your networking strategy? How did it work?
Nice question. I hope this doesn't feel too arrogant. I think one of the benefits of being quite visible and working with quite big companies is you have a reasonable amount of inbound requests. You have headhunters approaching you. And so you don't need to get to the position that you're actively looking for new roles. As long as you're approachable, actually, there's a reasonable chance that an inbound will come which engages your interests. So just in terms of the networking side of things. So that's one piece, is that as you get more senior, I'm not sure I'd say it gets easier, but the dynamics change a little bit. And so you're less applying and you're more approached. I think I believe, I guess the one thing that I think is the secret of my success is you have to believe in something. You have to stand for something. You have to have a passion about something, right? And a lot of in the last few months, I've looked at quite a few CPO roles and talked to companies looking to bring in a CPO. And in almost all cases, something was broken, something was missing. They were struggling with something, often at a critical moment of scaling, where they'd scaled up with some founders and it's been well to start with, and it's plateaued or it's struggling. And surprisingly large amount of the time, people really wanted help with vision, with recalibrating their vision. Why are we here? What are we doing? It seems hard to imagine that you're a business with 50, 100, 150 people. You're financially successful, and yet you need help with vision. But I think that's probably a pattern during scaling points of time where stuff's gone wrong. Maybe founders have left. Maybe there's been a change in leadership. Maybe some market forces have changed, and so really most of the conversations I had, people really needed somebody to help own the vision, to partner with key stakeholders, to realign them, to help get that vision going. And when I think about CPOs, I think there's two types of CPO. And the one type, but both of them, you would bring them in to stabilize a rocky ship. You bring them in when things aren't quite right. And the one is the vision type, where really you're about recalibrating market fit and what matters and North Stars. And the other is about just being an awesome implementer, that there's just too many requests and too many inbounds and too many visions, and you just get shit done and bring efficiency and bring stability. And those are both really useful in times of kind of chaos. And you maybe look for a different one depending on which founders are around and what the ingredients are. So I think being awesome at either of those is great. Being visibly talking about or visibly confident in your ability to step into a rocking ship or a messy situation and help work it through, and that's really helped. And so in my case, I do think I believe in things. I believe strongly about why I do tech, looking for impact. Does it really mean something? Is the product doing a user impact, a learner impact? If not, why are you doing it? And helping recalibrate. And that's certainly worked well for my career. I don't know. I can't really speak for anybody else, but it's what gets me out of bed anyway. And so just being visible about it and talking about it and sharing publicly, I think has helped to build that bit of a reputation around me, which has probably attracted businesses that are interested in looking for that.
Yeah, I love that. I love the take. I think that in the current market dynamics, being public is actually a great asset. Cool, Geoff. We are running out of time now. As I promised, I took exactly as much time as I said it would.
You did. I thought you'd be bored in 20 minutes, but you stuck with it.
Thanks a lot for joining us today. Congrats with your new role. And see you at some point.
Thanks, dude. And good luck to all those product managers out there climbing up the ladder and navigating this crazy time at the moment. Yeah. Have fun.